Hi everyone, my name is Irene. In April of 2024, I finished my thesis animation short, Arktus. In this video, I want to share the behind-the-scenes process of my thesis film. I hope it can be helpful for anyone working on or planning to work on their own independent film. So a quick background about my film. I studied the 4-year Bachelor of Animation program at Sheridan College. The first 2 years were studying various fundamentals about animation. In the 3rd year, we need to collaborate with other students to make a group short film. And in the 4th year, the final year, we need to make our own thesis graduation film independently. The inspiration of the whole short came from the main character, Leora. At first, she was just one of my OCs. I just know that she's a character that is very quick to anger, and the anger would make her transform into a tiger. And then I started wondering, what kind of world does she live in? Can everyone transform into animals? What kind of problems exist in this world? As I kept exploring those questions, I ended up building a whole world around her, and the more I thought about it, the more ideas kept appearing in my head. The short film took about 8 months to make, split across 2 semesters. The first semester was all about developing the story and design, and the second semester was for the actual production process, starting from storyboards all the way to the finished film. These 8 months didn't include the time spent on finding inspiration. Usually, students start thinking about their thesis ideas before 4th year starts. Some would even prepare artwork ahead of time. Here's a rough breakdown of my production pipeline. First is the script. A general rule of thumb is 1 page of properly formatted script usually equals about 1 minute of animation. So you can kind of estimate the length of your short based on how many pages of scripts you have. Next is the beat board, which is like drawing out the key moments of your story using a few rough sketches, kind of like a visual outline. And then it's storyboard. At this point, the film starts to break down into individual shots. Now you need to think about how the camera moves, how the characters move, the pacing of each scene, and how we go from shot to shot. Written notes are added to represent dialogue and sound effects. After that, it's time for the animatic or Leica. This is basically your storyboard, but as a video. This is the step where you add temp music, sound effects, and voices. The animatic gives you something very close to a rough version of the final film. This is Arktus, a city built on the most remote island to contain all the mutants in this world. Each mutant's transformation is triggered by a specific emotion, like anger, hey, or fear. Sorry. And that was the end of the first semester, the first 4 months of the whole process. From script to animatic, your story will go through a lot of changes, but usually those changes get smaller and smaller as you go through each step. Ideally, once the animatic is done, you shouldn't make any more big story changes, because when you start production, the more you change, the more you have to rework. So it's a good idea to finalize your story in your animatic as much as possible before you move on to the production phase. Okay, now we're in the production phase. Animation and backgrounds are being worked on at the same time. Both start out as roughs and then get cleaned up and colored. Once animation and backgrounds are done, we go into compositing, where things like shadows, highlights, and color grading are added. In the early times of the production phase, I was also reaching out to the final voice actors and composer, arranging recording sessions and going through revisions. I also started to find helpers to help with background line art and coloring. Before we start the entire production phase of the film, our school required us to pick 1 shot to fully complete, from rough animation all the way to the final composite shot. Looking back, I think that was actually very smart, because by doing this 1 shot, you get to test out if your whole pipeline actually works. Is your production plan realistic? Are there anything that takes up too much time? Are there any steps that you can simplify? You can discover all of that through completing this little mini pipeline. Once you finish that one shot, you can adjust your entire production pipeline based on how that first one shot went. After the animatic is done, I started building the shot list, which is basically a spreadsheet that tracks the progress of your film. It lists out every single shot in the film and marks whether it's at rough, cleanup, color, or compositing stage. I also added a pie chart that shows the overall progress of the film. Pretty much every studio uses some kind of tracking spreadsheet like this. The format varies, but for your own personal use, it can be anything you want. I made mine in Google Sheets. I had a main sheet for the animation shots and a separate one for backgrounds. The background sheet tracks which background appears in which shot, whether it shows up once or multiple times, and whether it's a full shot or a close-up. This part is really important. Like, if a scene shows up twice, once as a wide shot and once as a close-up, you need to make sure the background is drawn big enough. Otherwise, you are going to compositing and realize it's too small, and you'll have to either stretch it and have it looking blurry or redraw it again. These two sheets are linked. If I mark a background as done in the background sheet, the main sheet automatically updates. So, knowing the basics to spreadsheets was also very helpful in improving my efficiency. I also track how much time each stage of animation of each shot took me. I would set a timer on my phone while animating, partly to keep myself focused and partly to help me estimate how long a shot took and whether or not I was falling behind schedule. I will also write a short description next to each shot, like, he offers to show her around, she's annoyed by his friendliness, and walks away. Kian still follows, not sensing that he's unwelcomed. Or, police 2 fires. This way, the voice actors, the composer, sound designers, and background helpers all understand the context of each shot, and there won't be any confusion about what's happening. I knew from the beginning that I won't be able to make industry quality animation by myself. Some people can, but just not me. So to save time, I looked into other works that had a rougher art style but still felt complete. And I realized it's okay to have rough sketchy lines, limited animation, and simplified backgrounds. As long as the story is good and the appeal is there, even something that feels rough can still be entertaining. Once I committed to this rougher look, I was able to skip the cleanup stage for animation. I can just clean up my roughs a bit and call them clean animation. That saved me a lot of time. For the backgrounds, I originally wanted to go for a more painterly Ghibli style look, but after trying it out, I realized it was way too time consuming and technically demanding. Once I switched to a rougher style, it got so much easier and faster. And the rougher style is easily replicable for my helpers as well. Even though the finished film looks rough, I'm honestly quite happy with my choice. This relaxed, sketchy style is the reason I was able to finish my short film on time. After I finalized the story in the animatic, I also started to rough out the animation and backgrounds right there in the animatic to make things easier later. I would try to pin down most of the character poses and timing as much as possible. Basically doing rough animation in the animatic. Because during animation, you're just focusing on one shot at a time. It's hard to get a sense of how the motions feel as a sequence unless you kept compiling the shots together. So I'd rather figure out the animation posing and timing earlier while I can still see the big picture. For the same reason, I try to rough out most of the background layouts during the animatic stage. I use Storyboard Pro to make my animatic. It has a perspective tool, so I would finish the rough backgrounds at that stage, making sure that the layout and character come together to make a good composition. Later in production, I could use these rough backgrounds directly as reference during animation, and I can export them as PSDs and hand them off to my background helpers for cleanup and color. This one might not apply to everyone, but for me, being able to animate and composite in the same software made a huge difference in my workflow. I used the software Toon Boom Harmony. It's not just an animation software, you can also do your compositing right inside it. I added all my shadows, highlights, and color adjustments right in Harmony. Some people prefer using After Effects for compositing, but that means you have to export all the layers, import them into After Effects, and do it all again if you need to change the animation. It's not necessarily a bad method, I'm just lazy. And I knew Harmony better than After Effects, so I choose to composite in Harmony. Plus, in Harmony, you can even go back and forth between animation and compositing. Sometimes I will start animating a shot and then pause halfway, jump into compositing to test how it looks, and then go back to finish up animation. I'm just a huge fan of Harmony compositing. Another way to save time is good old 3D. For example, a lot of the White City shots in my film were built with 3D models first and traced over. 3D was especially useful for locations that appear multiple times or need to be seen from different angles. Like this one location I call the Murder Alley or the Doctor's Lab. Once you build the model, you can just rotate it and trace it from any angle, which saves a lot of time and avoids perspective and continuity mistakes. I also use AI-generated images to help me brainstorm designs. I know how everyone feels about AI, but just hear me out. I didn't use the first thing that the AI spits out and just plop it right into the film. It was more like generating a whole bunch of locations and pick one that feels the closest to what I want, and make design changes on top of it, and then apply the usual cleanup and color process like any other background drawings. Another example was this shot. A shot looking up at a statue in the middle of tall city buildings. When I first tried to draw it, the perspective looked all wrong, and it's obvious that I just pulled it right out of my head. It was difficult to find reference for this shot. The subject is just too unique and there wasn't an exact match. So I fed my own sketch into Midjourney and asked it to generate photographic style images based on that. After a lot of iterations, I finally got a version that matched what I was imagining and used it as a reference for the background art. Overall, the production process went pretty smoothly for me. The biggest challenge actually happened in the early story stage. From the beginning, I wanted to make a trailer-style thesis film, but my school preferred something more traditional, something with a clear beginning, middle, and end, a standard 3-act structure. They felt that a trailer didn't really show that the school had successfully taught me how to tell a complete story. So I tried to force my trailer idea into a traditional format. But the more I changed, the weirder I felt. Every time I showed my animatic to someone, I felt embarrassed. I wasn't proud of what I made. People kept asking questions that I thought I had already answered in the film. And that made me feel like my story wasn't working at all. Around the end of the first semester, our school invited an alumni who had already directed 2 feature films to give us one-on-one feedback on our animatics. After watching mine, he said, "I think you should watch more trailers." The words themselves weren't anything special, but to me, it was the final push I needed, the last straw. That's the moment I realized the story I have now isn't what I wanted at all. Not a proper trailer and not a proper 3-act story. That's why, even though it was time when I should have been locking down my story, I still decided to make a lot of changes to my animatic. After the changes, I finally felt proud of my story. Looking back, I think one of the most important skills for any creator is learning how to handle external feedback, knowing when to take it and when to let it go. Because in the end of the day, it's your film. You don't have to accept every advice coming your way. I believe that it's very important to know yourself and know what your goal is for the project. Take 4th year as an example. Everyone had different goals. Some people just wanted to finish something and graduate. Others want to use this opportunity to create strong portfolio pieces or a mix of different goals. For me, this was a precious opportunity to make something that I had full control over. I wanted to make the most of it. I wanted to create something that I could look back on in the future and still feel proud of. Because after graduation, I'll probably be working at a studio, making the studio's vision come true. Even if I wanted to work on a personal project, I'll have to squeeze that time out of my work and life. That is why I don't want to miss this chance to make what I wanted to make. Because I had experience making a group film in third year, I knew how time-consuming animation projects can be. The group film was 6 minutes long, made by 10 people, and it was still super busy and tight on schedule. So in fourth year, working completely by myself, I figured something around 1 to 2 minutes would be most ideal for me. But the thing is, 1 to 2 minutes isn't really enough time to tell a story with a lot of information or complexity. And I really wanted to use the Arktus story since I find it very interesting. That's what led me to the trailer format. It fits the short screen time that I needed, but still allows for high story density. You can jump from one scene to another, from one moment in time to another, and it will still make sense to the audience. It also gives that highlight reel kind of feeling. You pack the coolest, most intense moments together. So in just a couple of minutes, the audience feels like they've watched an entire show. Another great thing about the trailer format is the negative spaces. For example, after a shot of the two main characters meeting for the first time, the next shot is them already being close friends. I never show how they went from strangers to friends, but the viewers fill that in with their own imagination. And the version in their head will always be better than what I can come up with. It's like looking at a sketch and imagining how the finished artwork will look like. So at first, the short runtime felt like a limitation, but eventually I turned that limitation into something special about the film. The way I chose to solve the problem actually made my film more unique. So if you're working on your own film, I think it's worth asking yourself, is there something you thought was a weakness or a constraint that could actually become part of your style? Maybe you're not confident in your use of color. You could try going full line art or black and white, or even use screen tones like a manga. You could even make a short about manga. The goal is that your limitation become part of your storytelling. Instead of hiding them, you embrace them and make them look like a deliberate choice. In my opinion, the early stage decisions are the most important. The later it gets, the less impactful those decisions get. If you decide at the beginning that your story is about romance, or it's a comedy, or a thriller, that already sets the foundation of your film. Or say you decide the story happens during snowfall. By the time you're in compositing, stressing over how the snow should fall or what color it should be, those decisions are so much smaller compared to the decision of setting the scene during snowfall in the first place. I think it's important to spend more time in the early stages and figure out what you actually wanted to make. It's only worth it to make something when the story is worth being told. You don't have to start with a really big project, like a 2 or 3 minute short film. I know 2 or 3 minutes sounds short, but trust me, my 2-minute thesis film took me 8 months to finish. Plus, I was working on it full time. So, if you're just starting out, I recommend starting with something small and manageable, like a 15-second animation. Back in my second year of college, I had a class where we had to make 3 super short films in 1 semester, each one only 15 seconds long. And honestly, that class helped me a lot because I was able to go through the entire production process from start to finish multiple times. In a short time frame, I gained a lot of insights on how to complete a project. And those small projects really helped me prepare for the big ones later on. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. This is my first time making a video like this. I hope it's helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. I simplified a lot of things to keep this video at a reasonable length. So leave a comment if you have any questions. I'm not sure if I'll keep making videos like this, but if I do, then see you next time. Bye bye.